Hey everybody, and welcome to the DBS Films Podcast. My name is Kellen, and with me as always is my brother Brendan, and together we make movies with DBS Films. Today we are going to hop into the third and final part of The Haunting of the Morgan Estate. And if you've listened to part 1 and 2 already, you know that this is really going to be one where we dive into exactly what happened in post-production, why this was the hardest movie for us to ever complete, and a lot of the pitfalls that we see in the indie community and just from our experience in general. Before we hop into that, though, I do want to go ahead, another shout out to The Girl in Cabin 13, our newest feature on Tubi. It is still up there. It's still ranking high in horror. It's still ranking high in recommended. So if you haven't seen it yet, please go ahead, take a look at that. If you've already watched it, feel free to stream it again. You know, it's absolutely free to watch on Tubi. So you definitely have our gratitude if you do that. And thanks to our super fans for being so supportive as well and making sure that they're watching it too. Also, we do have a merch store. If you're on YouTube, you can take a look. I got like a DBS mug right in front of me. We got a lot of cool items too. So feel free to check that out. As always, join our Discord. That's where the super fans live. And that's where we can go ahead and give you a lot more perks if you support us, because we want to build this community. We want to support our fans, because without you guys, we can't do what we love to do. So with that, let's hop back into The Haunting of the Morgan Estate. Now, you know, really, I think the place I want to start is, I think this is something that I see a ton in the indie film community. Probably it's just something that happens a lot just with creatives, being able to come to terms with what your final product is going to be. You know, I think the hardest part of filmmaking is just getting it across the finish line. That last 30% is just such a brutal experience. It can be tedious. It can be something where you're not willing to compromise. You can bog yourself down in reshoots, having more budget. There's just a lot of issues, no matter the size of the film, whether it's, you know, a Hollywood big budget film or it's an indie film, that can arise in post-production to just cause all sorts of issues. So would you say that, you know, post-production in the indie film and just in filmmaking in general can really be the make or break for a film?
Yeah, I would say it's probably the hardest. Going into a movie, you have your vision, you have the idea of how this movie is going to turn out in your head, and then when you're on set and you're actually shooting, there's going to be issues and problems that happen, and maybe you won't get as much coverage as you wanted to, but still in your head, you still have the integrity of the vision, and you understand that you're going to have some compromise, but it's not going to be that bad. Then when you get to post-production, you're going to have issues as far as, how you think the movie paces and flows in your head is not going to be what you're seeing when you finally get a final product. You're going to have audio issues. The music is just not going to be what you have in your head. Some of the performances might be a little bit off. And then once you start to get feedback, you really have to separate yourself from your original vision of what you wanted this movie, what you thought this movie was going to be, and into reality, which is, okay, how do I try and make this the best movie possible, even if it diverted from what I originally thought it was going to be. And I think that compromise and coming to that understanding is a big problem for a lot of filmmakers, especially if you've poured years into this project, it's your passion project. And now you have to come to terms with, this movie is not what I had in my head. It can be completely different. Really, out of the Hateful Eight, the ones that I did were mainly completely different than what I had in my head, or the vision that I had going, writing the screenplay. The last two were much closer to what I had in my head. And I think the Murder House, which is coming out soon, was probably the closest to a finished product of what I have in my head and how we actually shot it. But I think having it in your head and visualizing it and then being able to get that as your final product it's a skill. And I think that's the difference between a beginning filmmaker and a filmmaker who has a lot of experience, is you could take that vision in your head and translate it to a final product. Where when you're first starting out, when I was first starting out, the stuff that I was thinking and how I thought these movies would turn out was completely different. I think it's a very difficult and harsh reality that the filmmaker needs to, sit down and just really decide what's best for the movie, as opposed to, how true can they stick to their original vision.
I think that's a great point you bring up. And one thing that we've mentioned before that comes up with filmmaking more so than any other art form is I feel like when you first start filmmaking, or just even if you have zero experience whatsoever, for whatever reason, film more than anything, I feel like people overestimate their capabilities. They overestimate going into the writing phase of what they can do. So when they're writing it, they have these grand ideas of how it's going to work out. They overestimate what they're able, they overestimate what they're able to do when it comes to actually filming it. And then reality hits them in the post production. Whereas what I feel like's ended up happening for us specifically is the more movies we have under our belt, the more we actually rein in our expectations. So what you were talking about with The Haunting of the Murder House or The Girl in Cabin 13, after completing both The Devil in the Room and The Morgan Estate, because again, we finished filming Morgan Estate, and instead of fixing it, we just said, let's hop right in Devil in the Room because we have things lined up. Let's keep the momentum going and we'll fix it in post, which is a nightmare phrase to ever say. But I think people overestimate. And I think because of the experience we have now, we just have a much better idea, like you said, of what the final product is going to look like. Do you think that's a pitfall for a lot of, novice filmmakers or someone who hasn't experienced the nightmare that can be out there for you?
Yeah, I think most people, when they first start making films, they, like you said, they over exaggerate, or they don't understand how difficult it is, or they think, they overestimate their abilities. So they think, a lot of people do not watch very low budget independent movies. Most people, the movies that they watch when it's low budget, it's $1 million. So you're still getting a lot of, beautiful cinematography, expert sound, great actors. And, when they try and make a movie for, 20, 30, $50,000, there's going to be issues and they're not going to have all that stuff. So in your head, I was like, visualizing $1 million scenes and flawless audio and being able to get performances out of all the actors, because they've had experience on set before. And I think with independent films, you're not going to have a lot of that. So you really have to understand, what you're working with, the limitations that you have, and how to essentially get the most out of the limited budget that you have. And I think that's a skill, and it's understanding of how to write a script to make sure you're putting yourself in a place to, succeed. Where I think most filmmakers go into these productions and they have these crazy grand visions, and a lot of it is they're putting themselves in a place, they're setting themselves up for failure. So I think that's a skill, but it's also learning how to operate the camera, learning how to edit, learning how to work with the actors. That just makes things easier as you go. So when you're first starting out and you're trying to do all this stuff and there's just so much information, there's time crunches that are being thrown on top of you. It's very difficult to essentially interpret all this information and then make a product that is sticking to your vision and the outline that you wanted to, essentially make this film.
Yeah, it really is something where, I mentioned, I think in the past episode, or maybe the first episode, is had we not completed 6 movies going into The Haunting of the Morgan Estate, The Haunting of the Morgan Estate would most likely never have been completed, unless you decided to just double your budget. And which again, that's just not, if you want to make a functioning business, if you want to continue to do this, you can't just look at doubling the budget. It's something that will break you. And having that little bit of experience we had, at least saved us to be able to make it. And what I will say, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news for any up and coming filmmakers who are listening to this podcast. What I do want to just make clear is it's going to be hard, but in the process, you will become better. I think in the future, and what we're seeing now with Girl in Cabin 13 as well, we will point back to this movie and The Devil in the Room as one of the biggest turning points for us, because we went through such a landmine, such barbed wire. It's just terrible experience of getting this thing finished and across the line. And you know what? It's pretty good. I think that my biggest issue with The Haunting of the Morgan Estate and The Devil in the Room is when people watch it and they're like, "Oh, this is really, really good." I'm almost like, you don't know what it took to get to that position. And because of that, it really gave us a tremendous amount of experience. So, would you just want to talk about the experience you get from writing, the experience you get from filming, and then the experience you get from completing, just in the sense of how valuable it gets when you get each stage of that completed?
Yeah, I think having a finished product and then being able to go back from a top down perspective and look at it all the way through the process, from writing the script to editing the movie to actually shooting and being on set, it just gives you perspective, and you can see the mistakes as they played out, and you can kind of, make sure you avoid those mistakes in the future. I think, and I touch on this a lot, I think making good films and being a good filmmaker isn't necessarily having a whole bunch of cool scenes and being the best writer or the best editor. It's really just avoiding, pitfalls. It's, we made mistakes and that's understandable, but we're doing our best not to make those mistakes again. And there's just a lot of scenes that were mistakes and we just throw them out. But then every once in a while you get something that's good, and we'll take that and we'll move it to another movie. In the upcoming movie we're doing with the shapeshifter, we're pulling little scenes and little pieces from the girl in cabin 13, Into the Woods, from the murder house, which we just did. These are scenes that I know we can pull off, that I've gotten really good feedback from, and I understand that people like them, so we're going to add them into the movie. So we're essentially stacking scenes on top of each other that I know we can do well and that have provided a good viewer experience in the past. And then we'll throw in some new stuff to try new things, but you're kind of slowly figuring out where these landmines are, avoiding the landmines, and then finding the things that you like and adding them to your movies. And, when we first started out with Gone, we had no idea what was a good or bad scene. So we were starting from scratch. But I think you really only get that perspective when you have a finished product. If you don't have a finished product and you just kind of shelf it, then you don't really need to, number one, go through the compromise, sitting down with yourself and really reflecting on the movie. You're not going through the compromise stage, and you're not really learning from the experience as much as you possibly can. So no matter what happens, I do think you should try and finish a movie. Even if it's completely broken, I still try and finish it to the best of your ability and at least try and upload it. Now, obviously the best case scenario would be to create a finished product, upload it, and get it to pass quality control for a distribution company, because passing quality control is a huge step, because it'll show you all the technical issues that you may not see in just a regular upload to like YouTube or a Vimeo. Actually getting it on the cable networks and the larger streaming platforms, they'll show you your mistakes so you can avoid them the next time. Then the second best would just be to get something finished that you can show your friends and your family. So I think completing is definitely something that you need to do, and it should be your number one goal. It's always going to set. My number one goal is, okay, I'm completely willing to compromise on this. I'm willing to do whatever it takes just to get a finished product and get it uploaded somewhere.
Yeah, I really do think it's such a multiplier effect. If you end up writing something and you don't get it filmed, well, you don't quite know how that's going to translate when it comes to just being able to pull it off. If you film something but you don't complete it, you don't really understand, what that actually looks like pieced together. So getting all the way through that process really just levels up your experience so much and is so beneficial. And it is by far one of my biggest pieces of advice to anyone is make sure you complete it. Just do what it takes. Compromise, understand that, there's nothing stopping you from remaking it. We already are looking at the Morgan estate as one of the first ones that we're going to really dive back into. And we already know what we would do differently, what works from it, what doesn't work, because we have the product already. So that's just kind of something that, I really hope anyone listening out here who is in the film industry understand this part is going to be hard. This part is going to be tough, but this is going to be what gives you the most experience and is what is the most beneficial for you in the long term. So with that being said, let's pick up where we left off. So we barely got the coverage we needed. We got them out the door to their Ubers and out of the place. And we immediately were like, we got to do a reshoot. So I remember I got back for this, and you're like, last I talked to you, you're like, I don't think we have a movie. I think you're on 24-hour notice of getting something done. And then you said to me, I have these hard drives. I need to understand what this is. Because this again was one where I wasn't on set to be able to do the live editing. So we just didn't know. I mean, you knew there was issues, you knew there was things wrong, but you said, I need this. Also, we're filming on Tuesday and it's Friday. So I remember this for me. I think this is going to be one of the DBS moments. I basically took from Friday nights, all of Saturday, all of Sunday, probably about 30 hours just to make a rough, just to understand, figure out where it's at. And realistically, I was just basically given, I mean, I had a hand in writing and doing the script, so I knew what the plot was and those things, but I was basically given these hard drives and, hey, here we go. Versus on-set editing, I have a much better frame of reference, what we're doing and what we're going through. So that was quite the ordeal, but it's something that I look back at, and that's when I really, it goes back to, hey, if we can finish this and make this work, we can do pretty much anything. So I was able to turn around a rough. And when we were looking at it, we knew we needed the intro, and we knew we needed the climax to increase. But one of the best things we noticed from the rough is we were able to figure out where the cuts just did not work and where we needed to have a step in for our lead female character so that we can at least move her around the house. So do you want to just talk about, how even having a rough going into the pickup shots was tremendously helpful versus being completely blind, and how it just kind of gave you the first set point of, oh boy, this is going to take a bit more work to get it finished?
Yeah, when I left this set, I knew we needed an intro. We didn't get the intro, which was sort of by design, because I didn't need the lead actress, because we were running against time. So it was like, all right, what do I need the two lead actors for? What scenes? So we try to knock all those out. So it was really, we needed an intro. And then we had a couple scare scenes that we needed to pick up as well, but we didn't need the lead actress. The issue that was uncovered when editing all this stuff was there's a lot of transition scenes where the actors, or the main actress, the one we needed, was moving through the house, and we just never got them, which is one of the reasons I recommend, if you're going to work on films, to edit, so you can kind of get an editing mindset. Throughout this whole film, I was like, I don't know if this is going to cut together. I'm not really sure. But, I was trusting that it was going to work out. Well, when I gave it to Kel, he's like, man, this actress is in one scene here, one room here. And then, she teleports to another room, and we don't have a transition shot. And you can fix that with establishing shots. But I mean, you can only do that so many times before it's just like, man, they're cutting back to the moon a lot, or the lake, or whatever establishing shot we had. So, we're missing, the movie's just not flowing. So we had to figure out a way, without using the lead actress who we sent back on a plane, how we pick up all these transition shots, how we pick up the intro hook of the movie, which is the most important part of the movie. And then how do we, I think we had like a little bit of climax stuff that we needed to pick up as well. Like that climax scene in my head, once again, going back to my vision, was a 15-20 minute sequence of cat and mouse where the killer is chasing the lead actress. I think we maybe got 3 minutes of footage. We just got them running on the ground. And then when she stabs him in the neck was the only thing that we really got. So there's no climax on this movie. So we had to sit down and be like, all right, look, this is what we have. This is what we need. And then we had to figure out how to essentially get that done without having either of the lead actors on set with us.
Yeah, it really was, eye-opening going through that first rough and just basically being like, hey, there's, we're going from here to here. Cause like you said, it was like a happy scene. And then we pick up, she's in the attic and it's a scare scene. And you really do need to have somewhere where the happy music fades out, the scary music picks up and she walks from one area to the other. So we did a lot of body doubles. We had one of our actresses who played the ghost, and she was also in the intro. She ended up stepping in as a body double, and I played the body double during the climax of the main villain. So what's interesting to me is, I almost have to point that out to people with how well we were able to blend it in. I was like, that's not them, that's not them. So we had to do a lot of those elements to pick it up. But first things first, we don't have an intro. We don't have the climax. So we get the team back together. This is already causing a huge dent in the budget because you had to re-rent the Airbnb. We had to get everyone back in there. We had to do all of this process. And, let's talk about, again, when it comes to pickups, I think something that's interesting with them is if you're not in that flow state of the production in the sense of day 1, 2, 3, you're in the groove of it, expect it to be a lot slower. Because I remember this one was one where I was like, hey man, how long will I be out there for? And you said, oh, you'll be out there, you'll be done by midnight. And I literally stayed up the whole night, and I ended up driving from work or from there to my job in downtown Orlando, just 24 hours. And I think you guys kept filming still until noon. So we thought midnight, needed an extra 12 hours. But do you just want to talk about, again, pickups and why you should how would you strategically do pickups when you have to, and why would you try and avoid them at all costs?
Well, if I'm going to do pickups, I would definitely have a rough cut done so you know exactly what you need. Because I think nothing would be more demoralizing than doing pickups, then putting them back in the rough and realizing you need to do more pickups. So having a rough done and knowing exactly what you need is super important. The issue with pickups is that there's a more relaxed vibe on set. No one's really pushing. I'm not really pushing as hard as I usually am. So everyone's kind of relaxed. You're like, I only need this, these couple shots. So it shouldn't take that long. And pickups always take way longer just because you don't have that urgency, the sense of urgency to get all this stuff done. And we had a basic shot. We had a girl in a closet, has to come out of the closet. She has to go down to the front of the house and get stabbed. So on a regular shooting schedule, if I was shooting myself, I'd allocate 2 or 3 hours to this. I think I could totally knock it out in 3 hours. It wouldn't be too difficult. This took us about 12 hours to just get that done. And it was like, we started to fight daylight because there's a lot of scare scenes that we needed where the house needed to be dark. So it was just, I think we were almost on set for 18 hours. Did you just pickups, which is basic pickups, is that intro scene. And then just our production assistant walking around the house to get her feet in her hands, just so we have some of these transition shots. But I'd always recommend to try and not get pickups just because you want to have a finished product. Anytime you have to do pickups, it delays the process. We spent 3 weeks trying to do pickups for the last movie just because we had a tornado warning and then Kel broke his computer. So you want to get everything and then just be able to edit the movie fully. And I think when you have pickup shots, it also allows you to fall back on that, being like, I don't really need to edit this too much because I still need these pickup shots. So it gives you kind of an excuse not to really work as hard as you need to. But if you do have to do pickup shots, I try and keep the same urgency as you do on set, because everyone has a tendency to relax. Things have a tendency to slide. And before you know it, you're going to be on set for 18, 20 hours for just some simple shots. And everyone at that point gets pretty pissed. So I'd always say, try and get it, schedule it, and get it done when you're doing your principal shooting days. If you do have to do pickups, make sure you bring the same urgency and intensity that you bring to, your principal shooting days when you do them on the pickups.
Yeah, I think what ends up happening is you remove that overwhelming sense of dread with the deadline you set for the filming. And, there's something very motivating about, we only have X amount of time left. We have all these scenes to do. We need to get this done. And if you're looking at that 2-3 days in advance, that's days on it. Whereas if you just show up and you're like, oh, we're good, you don't feel that urgency until it's like 2 a.m. and you're like, we don't have anything close to what we're supposed to do. So one of the other benefits that we had for the pickup is I was back on set being able to edit when I wasn't the stand-in for Stabbing, our PA, and lead our intro actress for her pickup stuff. And it allows us to quickly understand, what we needed to get. I also had the rough so we could look at them. We had two critical moments where we really just could not find the lead actress. She was leaving with a suitcase and she had to get one more like premonition from the ghost that she needs to stay and solve the case. So we needed to get that. We needed to get her up into the attic, and we needed to get her in the intro. And that was kind of our mindset going into it. Like we said, it took a ton of time, and we ended up getting it. We put it together, and then I think we started to really start uncovering. I had a rough and I had the scenes, but a lot of the scenes in the rough, I was like, hey man, like, this is rough, like audio, this scene that I'm using, I don't even know if this is one going to work. Like, just knowing that even the rough that I had was in bad shape. Now, a lot of it was, I did it in, 48 hours with like 30 hours working straight on it. But it was still something where we kind of understood we're going to spend a lot of time in the editing room. Did you kind of get that feeling as we were progressing?
Yeah, and I would always recommend to just try and get something completed on the timeline, even if it's not in good shape. Just getting a fully constructed movie on the timeline, it gives you a little bit of motivation. And then, like, my whole process is I get the first one done. I know it's not going to be good, but I'll go through it and then I'll send it off for feedback. I'll fix the feedback and go through it again. So I go through a movie probably 8 to 10 times before it gets to picture lock. And I think a lot of people try and make it perfect right out the gate. And I think that just causes a lot of procrastination, and it causes a lot of, issues, and you're slowing yourself down. Where I recommend just getting everything you need on the timeline and then just going from there. But looking at this one, and it comes back to, I think the two cameras are really detrimental because the scenes were just not like editing smoothly together. The eye lines were off. They were just odd angles and odd cuts. It was just a lot of just difficult stuff to cut together on a visual aspect. I know that we had two cameras. The white balance was off on a lot of the cameras. Sometimes the ISO was different. The lens, the stops on the lens were different. Sometimes we actually had a problem where we shot in ProRes and then we shot in like MP4. So like the formats were off, and getting all this stuff to match up was just very, very difficult and tedious. So if you're going to use two cameras, really make sure you get the DPs are coordinating with each other, making sure that the settings on the cameras match. Because to color correct this movie was just, I was literally going back and forth trying to match up the scenes because it was so difficult, where now I can just put an adjustment layer on it and it's pretty much done, just because I shoot with the LUT in the camera that I'm going to use on the movie. So I already know what it's going to look like when we're shooting in RAW with the Black Magic. So if you're going to use two DPs and two cameras, just make sure they're on the same page, because if not, you're going to have, a very difficult time doing the visual aspects of this movie. And then as far as the audio, once again, we kind of got lucky with the two found footage movies where people didn't really give us feedback about the audio because they're found footage movies. We go back to cinematic and we got air conditioners all over the place. There's artifacts all over the place. And once again, because we used two cameras, there was two different mic levels, and we were switching out, we had the boom mic. So we were unplugging and plugging the boom mic into different cameras, which had different volume settings. So putting this together was like, not only do we have to match the color to each different camera, we also had match the audio, which was different for each actor because we were unplugging and plugging the boom mic into different cameras. So to get this thing to match up and kind of level off it was the most tedious thing that we had to do as far as, a movie out of the 8 that we did already.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to something that we mentioned briefly in the past episodes. our recommendation is single camera and lav mics because it gives you that consistency of a product. And what we really experienced here was trying to literally mold one photo with one setting and one audio of one different length because we had so many different variables and they weren't on the consistent plane. Because of that, it just made everything such a nightmare to really kind of piece together and progress. So let's hop in a little bit to the timeline that we have, in the sense that I think it was a bold move, and like I probably wouldn't recommend it in hindsight, but I think that since we did it, it really helped us benefit. But we jumped right into the devil in the room. So we really went straight from this. We knew we had kind of a little bit of an issue here. We did some pickup shots, but we decided to say, hey, you know what I'm gonna go ahead and do? I'm gonna look at moving forward and continuing. We thought that was almost the best way for us to move forward. So what was kind of your mindset there?
Well, coming off this one, we did the pickup shots. Like I think 4 or 5 days later, we got all those shots. And then obviously we needed more pickup shots. We just needed more transition shots, which we got way down the line. But we had our production assistant did a great job going from the Morgan estate to the devil in the room. We essentially had a 6-week or maybe a 4-week turnaround time on this one. And she essentially had the whole movie ready to go. We had actors ready to go. We had locations locked down. We had all the props. So it wasn't hard jumping into the production. And when we get to the devil in the room, on that podcast, I'll tell you the downside of that was just, we didn't have a script. So we had everything ready to go, but our screenplay wasn't anywhere near where it needed to be, for me to give it the green light. And I wouldn't have probably lit the devil in the room at all if we didn't have everything ready to go. So I do think you can scale and you can film very quickly and very rapidly, but you really got to make sure you have all your ducks in a row. As far as like, you got to have a really good screenplay, and you also have actors and everything else to go along with it. So, with this one, and it's kind of an excuse, going back to like the excuse thing. I was like, all right, well, I could kind of put this one aside and, shove it under the rug for a little bit and focus on the devil movie, because maybe the devil movie will be like really, really good. So it wasn't until we essentially finished that movie that we really took some time to really uncover what we were doing with the Morgan estate. And even then, like once we had the rough, the longest amount of time that we spent on this movie was just trying to get the sound and the color to where it needed to be.
Yeah, I think this is also a downfall of us doing the found footage because, again, we did Into the Forest, and then we immediately picked up on the Haunting of the Suicide House. And that was a breeze to do. That was like, oh, okay. So I think almost our logic was like, oh, yeah, we screwed up a little bit here and there, and we made some issues, but let's just power through. Let's get another one done and we'll fix it in post. And surprise, surprise, both of the movies really suffered from the same type of things. We used a boom mic. We used 2 different cameras. We had a lot of the same issues that we went through in the Morgan estate that we did in the Devil in the Room. We had different issues on set, which delayed us because, again, you're going to have issues. You just don't know what they're going to be, so you can't really plan for them. And it is something where, if you don't get to that finished product, I will guarantee you're going to make the same mistakes. So it goes back to editing and post. But let's kind of skip ahead now. We finished The Devil in the Room and we were going pretty good. This was actually going into 2019. I think one of the biggest thing that honestly slowed DBS down was at the start of 2019, we got the new updated royalty from Amazon. So you want to talk about real quickly how the business model needs to be on something that is sustainable, and understand that you have to be changing as a filmmaker, especially nowadays, because the landscape is always shifting.
Yeah. So when we first started out with Gone and Unseen, the royalty rate with Amazon was 15 cents an hour watched, which is, very good. A lot of those movies made their money back within weeks. We had our personal Amazon rep that was working with us through Amazon Video. They were all excited about the program. And I just don't think Amazon gave it as much attention as it deserved. There was no real gatekeeper. So people were like literally uploading porn to Amazon. They're uploading copyrighted stuff. And I think it became such a headache that Amazon was like, all right, well, we don't want to cut it. What we'll do is just slash the royalty. So it went from 15 cents down to like 10 cents. Then it went to 8 cents. And then they came out with like metrics, and they were like, all right, depending on like how much people watch your movie and where they fall off, or, you know, what the watch through rate is, will either give you a penny or back up to 15 cents. And I was like, all right, well, cool. Like our stuff's like decent. It's better than most indie stuff that I'm seeing. I think we should be able to get higher than 8 cents. And, you know, I was asking Amazon, like, what's the actual metrics that are going into this? And they were like, well, it's confidential. Like, we're not going to give you that kind of stuff. I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. And then the royalty came out, and our stuff was in the 99% watched on Amazon. So it's a certain score, CER, and I think was the score, and just like customer engagement ranking was what it was. And our stuff is in the 99% of all Amazon stuff watched. So we're the top 1% of, you know, viewers and, you know, overall watch rate. And our royalty was a penny. So it went from 15 cents down to a penny, even though we were the top 1% on Amazon, which just made no sense at all. And I'm spending, you know, a good amount of money on Facebook ads and driving a lot of traffic to these movies, and to see it go from, you know, 15 cents down to 1 cent was just is a pretty brutal blow, because at the time we were trying to scale up, and, you know, the fact that the revenue just got cut from our feet just really kind of hurt. And it was a good thing, because it started to make me look at other options, which is distribution, which is what we do today, which is just spreading like our diversifying where the movie is and what platform the movies are on. And I think you're going to get some, because the industry right now is so volatile that the platforms that work today aren't going to be the platforms that work, you know, in the next 3, 4, 6 months. And you're seeing that where Amazon took away Amazon Prime for indies. Now they're starting to bring it back on a curated basis, meaning you have to have a distribution deal in order to get on there. And they're also starting to go AVOD with IMDb TV. But you're also seeing new ones step up with like Tubi and Shudder and all these little ones. Everyone's trying to get, you know, a piece of the streaming pie, which is good for indies. But back then it wasn't a good thing that was happening with Amazon. It wasn't a good thing for, you know, our income and trying to scale up as a business.
Yeah, it really took the wind out of the sails. Plus the fact that we had 2 movies in post that we had to continue to move through. So 2019, we actually, besides the pickups, we didn't film anything. We were just working on making the product, getting everything together, getting everything, you know, ironed out. And then 2020 happened, as we all know. And so we kind of took that time off there. So there's a big gap before, you know, we stepped back up. But I think it was a really good learning process. And also, I think one thing, you know, in my experience, I think a beginner filmmaker and filmmakers in general have a very entitled mindset of what they're doing and what the performance is going to be. And I do not blame them in the slightest for having this, because I would say, had you asked me, you know, going into these movies, I was like, yeah, we're going to have this great thing. It's going to be amazing success. All these people are going to watch it. But you're really not owed anything. You know, a lot of people are like, oh, Amazon, you're so evil. Why would you do that? They don't have to care about you. You know, they're a business. They're monetizing the product as best as they can. And realistically, they have a lot of different things going on where it's not their number one focus. You know, and I think you just have to understand as a filmmaker, it's not enough nowadays just to finish a film and be like, here. That's not going to happen, especially if you're not focusing on marketing, especially if you're not focusing on the different routes you can take. It is a tough process. So, you know, that was something that really stung, in the sense that I think it slowed us down a bit. You know, it just no longer became a major priority, because you only have so much time in a day. And are you going to focus on the thing that potentially is going to return you 1 cent, or the thing that is actually a prosperous business for you? So that slowed us down to a bit, but let's kind of hop back into we had the intro, we had the rough, we had a lot of key issues in the sense of, this was the first movie that we dramatically moved scenes around, in the sense that we identified really quickly, this is slow. Like, this is really slow. We just hit a massive point where they're talking on dialogue. We just had like 3 major dialogue dumps after the intro. And on top of that, the dialogue kind of sounds like it's underwater. And with that, I always mention, if you slow down in the downbeats, someone's going to pick your movie apart. They're going to look at it. They're going to notice the details. So this was one where I think we really were pretty much like a MacGyver in putting it together. But what were you feeling when it came to, finally sitting down for the first time, seeing this? And, I really think, if it wasn't for the mentality of like, we just got to complete it, if we wanted to make a money or a buck or anything like that, we probably would have just abandoned it.
Yeah, it just goes back to what I said. It's compromise. I got feedback from it. I gave it a hard look myself. I always give myself notes. And what I saw was, it was a well-paced movie in the script. It was a well-paced movie in my head. It was a well-paced movie when we were shooting it. It was a horribly paced movie when we edited the movie. And that's just because the intro hooks, it's got enough in there, but it's not super solid. The pop scare with Jake never really hit too well. And then there's like this gap of like 3 scenes on top of each other with a lot of character development stuff. And I think, looking back at the found footage movies, we were starting to get feedback because those movies were completed, and found footage allows people to really focus on the story. They're like, we want more depth with your characters. We really want to see their story more. So that's what we did. We really try to give these characters like a backstory. But if you give your characters a backstory and it's important to the script, you have to explain that. So we had to explain the relationship of the politician and the Meg character. We had to explain the politician and the groundskeeper's character. And then we had to also like weave in this mystery brother character and essentially start building the mystery. And this is all done in like a 15-minute sequence, where in the script, it seemed like it was fine because it was interesting dialogue, and they're doing, they're leaving little clues here and there. And if you're paying attention, in my head, and if you're reading the script, it makes sense in your head because it reads like a novel. But then you sit there and you realize that you're shooting an 8-minute scene with 2 really weird angles because we're using, 2 cameras. So they're both very, very tight on their faces. And the dialogue just never really gets hit as well as it needs to carry the scene. And, you're stuck with a 15-minute sequence of heavy character dialogue and, character building that just doesn't really move the movie forward. So we were like, all right, how do we, number one, move this around, and how do we cut it down to the bare minimum? I think the couch scene was like 6 or 7 minutes long, and we cut that down to like 2 minutes. We had a huge dinner scene that was like 3 or 4 minutes of heavy dialogue that we cut down, and it's just a montage. we just made it a montage. So, what was in my head, I had to compromise. I had to look at it and try and make the best decisions for the movie. And that was just cut as much as we possibly can to get the characters into the deeper mystery elements and keep the viewer watching the movie. Because I was like, man, if you dump 3 large dialogue scenes on top of each other, if I'm watching this movie, I'm turning it off. So we just couldn't have that. And it took a lot of trial and error. It took a lot of critical thinking to try and get this movie where we were essentially just moving scenes around just to try and get this thing done.
Yeah, that was something where we really learned a lot more from like the dialogue and the pacing. One of the biggest things I think we learned is like, if you have a dialogue scene, make them move. Like if you look at Girl in Cabin 13, when they're talking heavily, they're at least kind of moving back and forth. Whereas what ended up happening with this one is we have them sit down on a couch and basically go through like, your old, photo book, and like, here's the story of everyone. And it's just back and forth cut, back and forth cut. Now, originally in this movie, you basically would have from the intro, which was the one up, like that was a beat. We had someone get stabbed. It was a horror. I think the intro, actually, honestly, I like the intro. I think the intro sets it up perfectly, shows there's a murder, shows the murder happened at the house. So, I think the intro was fantastic in that sense. But then you go to explaining the politician, okay, he's an up and coming political candidate. Then you immediately go into them, oh wow, he's having like, he's seeing his campaign assistant, so they're intimate in that sense. So it's like, okay, you're developing that, and then on top of that, you explain the house they have. Then you have them sit down and explain the family. Now that's that 15-minute chunk, and literally what we ended up doing is we found a scare that we could pull from the beginning, put it in there, break it, or not from the beginning, but from later in the movie, and pull it in there. And that's where she goes into the attic and she sees the Jake character, like the groundskeeper, for the first time. And I think because we knew how important pacing was, we literally said this has to happen. Now I remember it was I think it was like at your apartment or somewhere. I can't remember where it was, but I remember just like walking back and forth and be like, what are we gonna do? And I remember just when we were like, you know what, like, can we move it? And then I remember looking at the footage and we're like, if we have that body shot of her walking, I think we can. To us, it looks kind of awkward, but realistically, when people watch it, they don't pick up on that at all. They just see it, okay, this is like the pacing of it. So would you want to kind of, talk about how pacing is so important that I would compromise on one or two issues of, maybe it looks weird here or there versus just dragging them through a long scene, such as the dinner scene, such as all the other dialogue dumps?
Yeah, I think you have to, pacing should really be your number one goal, especially with AVOD and trying to get your money back. I think there is a time for character development. I think you should always try and make as, deep characters as you possibly can, try and get the best performances out of your actors. But if it's not working, or there's something not there, or the feedback that you're getting is the movie's too slow, you have to just move on. Once again, you have to make a compromise. So I think understanding how to do that stuff and understanding general pacing, which is, I mean, if this movie was my second or third one, it probably have been, I probably would have left it all in there, and we would have had a hour and 20 minutes of very odd pacing and odd beats, odd beat structure. So I think it is a blessing that this was the seventh movie, because I knew how to properly pace, or at least I had a better understanding of how to properly pace a movie at this time. But I think, yeah, you have to really focus on pacing. And especially now, if you're going to distribution companies, or if you're trying to upload to Film Hub and get your money back, if the viewers fall off, they're not gonna, you're not gonna get your money back. The streaming platforms run on an algorithm, like Amazon run on an algorithm to see how many people would complete, from start to finish your movie. And if more people completed your movie, they would think, hey man, this must be a pretty good movie, and they recommend it. So if they're seeing that most people drop off 10 to 15% to the movie, they're probably like, oh, this isn't, it's not going to spike the algorithm. You're going to have a hard time, getting the streaming platforms to actually push your movie. So keeping all this in mind, I think there's a middle point between creating something that's just 120 minutes of pure action and no depth, versus something that is just a character driven story with long exposition and dialogue scenes. And if that's the movie you want to make, that's totally fine. I mean, there's great movies that have a lot of character depth and it's just a character driven story. Just be careful that that's very difficult to pull off as an indie, and it's going to be very difficult to monetize unless you really get great performances and you have a really unique story.
Yeah, that's pacing is something I always talk about now as like one of the most important things. And I just think as you get closer and closer to, the final product, it starts becoming more and more apparent of just how much you're kind of missing from it. And this was really something, more than anything, I think we had a lot of technical difficulties. We had a lot of issues of just kind of making scenes line up, cutting here, cropping in, panning this way, keyframe here, keyframe there. Just the audio levels going up and down on there. I mean, we must have spent probably like it was like 3 days on that, just me and you listening to the audio to see how can we get it to be even through the couch scene. Because the reason behind it is we're using a boom mic, we have 2 cameras, and we have like 30 different takes, and it felt like each one of those takes was slightly different to where things didn't match up and did match up. We cut a lot of lines out of there, we cut things down. But I mean, this was really, you almost have to have the willingness to compromise and go to town to whatever gets you through and completed to it. So, I think it's really shifted our mentality when it came to editing. Almost in the sense of like, before I think we were a little bit timid in editing, we're like, well, maybe we'll try this. And then because of the nature we had it, we're like, nope, we got to cut this. We got to do this. We got to make it work. So would you say, while editing was a burden, it was good at kind of getting us, at the end of the day, the pacing is what matters. The finished product is what matters. We need to compromise. We need to get it done. And the goal is just never find yourself in the situation as best as you can.
Yeah, I mean, it's a blessing. And it's a testament to the crew and everyone that worked on this project. Is testament to the 2 DPs that we were able to, get enough coverage and enough footage to actually upload this project. I'm super happy with everyone that worked on it. And it's just a testament to be able to complete an indie film in itself. That being said, like this is a good thing for us because it allowed us to really learn the technical side of editing and how to fix problems. There's no way I could have handed this off to another editor because it would have been tens of thousands of dollars in, just man time to get this thing to where it needed to go. I had to sit down and view this as my tuition and invest the time and really learn how to get proper audio and get proper video. And if you do happen to have mistakes, how you fix those mistakes. I do recommend Isotope RX9. It's an audio software now that fixes a lot of things. This is one thing that we discovered from the issues that we have with Morgan Estate. It's a little bit expensive, but it saves you so much time. And if there is just a little bit of issues, they're so much easier to fix. So I would say off the top of my head, we probably spent 2 to 3 months on audio with this one, and maybe 6 to 8 weeks on trying to get the color grade to match up and fixing visual issues. To give you an example of the time that I spent on Cabin 13, which is the movie that we did after we got away from Devil in the Room, and this movie, I spent maybe 2 weeks on sound, and I spent maybe 4 days on color because I just knew how to fix these mistakes. And I knew that this coverage and the stuff they were getting in the camera was going to be sufficient when I got to the editing room. And really the girl in Cabin 13 had only one big audio issue. And that was with one of the lav mics sort of fell off one of the actors, and he was wearing headphones. So the headphones would hit the mic. But because I was so good with working with Morgan Estate, it really wasn't that big of a problem. It bothered the shit out of me, but no one really realized that it was even an issue because we were able to fix it and pull it out in post.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, when I look at it, 30 hours in the rough, the live edit, I mean, I think I probably put at least like 200 hours or something into it. So I can only imagine, how much you pulled out because you were doing a lot of the audio stuff, getting the nitty gritty and then the color grading on it. So, it's like they say you need 10,000 hours. And I mean, we got a good mix right off the bat from just getting the haunting of the Morgan Estate to position where, we felt comfortable about it. And honestly, I would say I'm actually really impressed with what we did with the climax. And it's something where we did it again in the Haunting the Murder House. We kind of figured out, how do we extend this? It was a lot easier because we had me in a U-Haul van, so we could easily cut back to me. But we were able to take a climax that was literally her running out of the room, running to the red room, and then getting stabbed. I would say from her, getting free, maybe 6-7 minutes, and we got it to 15. I mean, we doubled it. And this was just through tension shots. It was literally, we filmed some at my house, we filmed some at her mom's house in the bathroom. I mean, we were pacing these things together, but that in itself, I think, made us so much more creative and problem solving, just when it comes to, now if we do need to do a pickup, I just think we really identify right off the bat what we can do and how we can make it as efficient as possible, which is what we experienced, growing Cabin 13. It had its pickup shots where we had to go out into the forest, we always plan for that. But with that being said, we kind of just have a much better idea of being creative and thinking on your feet. So almost like a strength training, I think it's like, if you have all of the freedom and all of the budget in the world to make something, you actually don't have to be as creative. Whereas we had basically, fill in the blank. So you want to talk about the whole mindset and kind of extending the climax, because we know two things: intro is important, climax is important.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, it turned out much better than I thought it would, especially when we were shooting that. And we were rushing to get the actors out to the airport. They were covered in blood, and we really only had about 3 or 4 minutes of actual climax. The fact that we were able to scrap it together and make it enjoyable for the viewer was a huge testament to just problem solving in general. But I think the Morgan estate is always going to be there, because it's like, no matter how bad it gets, and if I'm ever missing footage, or if there's, issues with the movie, I was like, oh man, if I can get the Morgan estate done, and I can get the Morgan estate uploaded, and I got my money back from the Morgan estate, I could face anything. The problems don't phase me anymore. Between this one and the issues with the Devil movie, I have confidence that no matter what the problem is, I can really fix it, or at least I could have give some serious thought and try and, figure out some way to, if I have to compromise, try and figure out the best way to get the movie uploaded.
Yeah, I would say more so than anything, the experience we got from finishing this product, from putting in the work, is really, I mean, it was worth any of that investment. I mean, to be in the nitty gritty of all of these issues that are going to happen. This is going to happen on your film set to one degree or the other. And by basically taking them head on and saying, hey, all right, this is where we're at. This is where we need to be. How do we make this happen? That really was a turning point for us. And, I think Girl in Cabin 13, I think when we got through The Devil in the Room and the Morgan estate, I think the only issue we found from that is we were just a little shy. We were a little bit nervous, in the sense that, okay, I'd just been through this nightmare process basically twice, and this was going to be the first time that you were going to do, being the DP on set. And I think we were nervous, so we wrote a very easy script. We didn't really try too much. And, surprise, surprise, it was so much better. And it was just the ability to edit now, having that in the back of my mind, it's so night and day. Like you were saying, you can at least go back and think of, oh man, it was so hard doing this, or it's so hard doing that. Whereas where we're at right now, it's like, well, this is such a breeze in comparison, because the things are lining up and they are molding. So, I mean, filmmakers out there, guys, don't look at this as like your only chance to make a movie. Just understand that you're going to be able to get experience from it. You're going to have to make it better. And I really do think that this was the best thing to happen to us, even though it was by far the worst experience that we had when it came to just the amount of work and everything we had to do.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think this is a stepping stone. And you put in your reps. You just, if you can understand the technical details of things and how to fix the technical details of things, and issues that arise, you really get a better understanding of what's going into the camera when you're shooting. You're just making sure that your white balance is proper. You're using a LUT inside the camera, so you have an idea of what it's going to look like when you finish it. I'm listening to the audio. I know where proper audio levels are going into the camera. So in post, I don't need to raise and lower them. The last movie that I did, I don't need to balance that audio very much at all, other than like some peaking issues, because I made sure to get the audio that I wanted in the proper levels in the camera. So already it's pretty much balanced. There's no refrigerator noise, there's no air conditioner noise, and if there is, I know how to fix it. So I think going through the Morgan estate was, my tuition at the School of Hard Knocks, and it made me a better thinker, and maybe my critical thinking skills were pushed to the limit. My technical skills were pushed to the limit. And this is the first one where we started to shoot the pickup stuff ourselves. So this was already me starting to be like, all right, like, I think the best way moving forward is to really learn how to operate the camera and get proficient enough that I can actually shoot the features myself. So this was like where that thought process started to happen, where we really wanted a linear communication style where the person who wrote the script directs it, shoots it, and then edits it, just to cut down on a lot of communication errors. And then, if I know how to do all this stuff, I have confidence in myself to get it done, as opposed to having to rely on a whole bunch of other people who have other timelines and other projects that they're working with. This is my passion project. This is what I want to do, and I could give it the time that it actually deserves.
That's a very great point. I think throughout, us making movies, it was almost kind of us being like, oh wow, like we can do this. And I would say it's a lot easier than you expect looking at it, in the sense of, if you're at first like, oh my gosh, how am I going to edit? How am I going to film? Or how am I going to do this? It can seem overwhelming when you see all those things. But in the same sense, it's more important that you just miss those major landfalls and those major explosions, which again is why it's very important to work with someone to some degree that has skill. This is us, movie number 7. We're really starting to see, oh, okay. I think the big one was when we were looking at the pickups and we're like, the pickups look pretty good. We're able to move this in here. And I think it was the same thing where, Into the Forest was the first time we're like, hey, our edit's pretty good here. The Haunting of the Suicide House is coming together. And then because of all the editing, because we couldn't really pass it off to an editor because it would cost, 400, 500 hours of time on their schedule, we just said, hey, we're going to do it. And it gave us the confidence moving forward that we can then do, a lot of the things. And, there's multiple reasons there's a benefit there. Both you and I, we're not taking a cut, really. We're just putting it back into the movies so that it saves up on a lot on the budget. But the biggest thing, like you said, is when you're the person responsible for putting together, you're going to be extra cautious throughout the entire process because you know what's going to happen. You know what's going to go wrong. So let's go ahead and talk about the most important thing when it comes to making a movie, how we're going to go ahead and market it. So let's just kind of chat that real quick. To give you an idea, we always split test our posters. We always split test our blurbs. And the winning blurb, a paranormal phenomenon, a mysterious curse, and an unsolved murder years in the making. Now, as we mentioned early on, this was more of a thriller. This was pretty much a depart from the normal, typical, scary dynamic we had. So do you want to kind of talk about what it's like pitching a thriller and just marketing in general when it came to the Haunting the Morgan estate?
Yeah, I mean, like, a lot of our books are based on this concept. So I was very familiar with the audience that this would target. I felt very comfortable going into it, marketing wise. I was actually able to pull a little bit of, our audience from our books and got them to watch this movie. So I was very confident that these haunted house mystery movies, where they're just a little bit more mystery than straight up horror, usually do very well because horror people want horror movies. This one has a broader range, so you can target more people. A lot of feedback from the people who really like this movie don't really like spooky or scary movies. They just like, mysteries, and having just a little bit of paranormal stuff in there gives it just a little bit of spice. So I felt good with this one. The ads that we ran were super cheap. We drove a ton of traffic to this one. And if Amazon was still paying us 15 cents an hour, this would have been our highest grossing movie of all time. The issue was it wasn't. There's probably around 5 or 6 cents at this time. So it was very difficult, even though we're sending massive amounts of traffic, to get that money back was difficult. And I think there were a couple of pacing issues in there. It took a little bit of time to get people going, so the watch through wasn't as high as some of the other movies were. But I think the people who stuck around and made it to the end watched it all the way through, and I think they were pretty well, or the movie was pretty well received. So, I mean, all in all, you got our money back, and that's money back from doing, an additional pickup day, which involved getting the whole crew out there, getting all the equipment back out there, and renting a giant estate on a lake, which was not cheap at all, getting that back out there. So it was definitely our highest budget movie by far, and to get the money back was good. It was not the best ROI just due to that and the fact that Amazon was paying us, 5 or 6 cents. But I look at this one more as an investment in myself. And this was like I said, the tuition to the School of Hard Knocks. And this was just a very big learning experience that if we didn't have, I don't think The Girl in Cabin 13, The Murder House, or any of the movies moving forward would have been as technically sound as they are. Because the last thing that I want to do ever again is I'd rather double check just to make sure mic levels are good, double check that the camera's in the proper settings, because I know that if I don't take those 5 or 6 seconds just to double check, I could end up with something like the Morgan estate again. And I'm almost like super paranoid now. I just really don't want this to ever happen again. But the fact is, I know how to fix it. I know what it takes to get this movie done if I ever get a movie that's in this shape again. So I'm more confident in my abilities to finish a project with a lot of issues than I was before.
Yeah, it really is something where the amount of confidence you got from this, and I think one thing that really surprised me, and now looking back on it, I'm not very surprised as much, but I think as a filmmaker and as a creative, you kind of go through this almost like, arc of up and then down and then up about how you feel about your own movie or your own product. Because this was definitely something where, when we were ready to release it, I feel like we're just like, oh my gosh, like, let's just be done with this thing. I've looked at it for so many hours, and you couldn't even watch it. The amount of time that we've spent watching it, you literally couldn't unbiasedly watch it without having that factor. And then when it was released, a lot of the super fans, it's their favorite movie. A lot of the people, it's the favorite one out there. People love the movie. They say it was great. They don't really talk about the issues. Yeah, the music's kind of weird here and there just because it's all over the place because we're fixing issues. But it wasn't like, people didn't say, what is this broken movie abomination? They said, oh, wow, look, it's a movie. This is, this is okay. And I think that was really surprising and also really motivating. So do you want to kind of go about how your opinion of this movie ebbed and flowed throughout the process?
Yeah, I first want to touch about the music, because this is a little hack that we kind of learned. Um, there was so much problems with the audio that, because we were cleaning it up so much, it sounds underwater. That's what happens when you pull out other noises like AC units or refrigerators, or if you didn't get the proper levels, you have to fix it that way. So it sounds very tinny and thin. You can run a music over that to try and fix it up a little bit. The issue becomes if the boom mic moves far away from the person and closer to them, you have to balance that against the music. It's called ducking the music, essentially. You have to duck the music under the dialogue, under the dialogue. And that was very hard in this movie. So the music sometimes drowns out what they're saying, just because it's very hard to raise those levels and keep the depth of the voice. But what we did learn from that is that having music all the way throughout the movie can replace room tone and can also pace the movie. It just makes the movie go a lot faster. So it's definitely a hack that you can use in your movie, even if it's very low. it still subconsciously registers, but it'll allow you to pick up your pace and keep it going. You just have to be careful that you're getting good audio to essentially duck it, and to make sure that, you're not just doing it too much. Like, I think that's the biggest feedback was, they're like, there's music all over the place in this movie. Well, yeah, because there's issues all over the place with the movie. But I think if you take that music out, you're going to have a lot of the pacing issues will become much more apparent. And I'd rather have the music in there and people complaining about that there's music in every single scene, rather than being like, well, this is boring. And you can see that if you take a cut of your movie without music and give it to people, the feedback is completely different when you put music to the movie. And I do this now whenever I do a rough cut. I just have basic music in there just so people can get an idea of what we're trying to do. But it's definitely a little indie hack that if your movie is suffering from pacing issues or slowing down, you can add music to the scene to pick it up again. That being said, you don't need to do that. If you have a really good pace movie, sometimes removing the music to bring the viewer into the element, into the scene, is actually beneficial. So it's a creative choice, but just know if you're getting feedback that your movie is a little slow, you can try and pick that up with some music. And it's a little thing that we learned through the Morgan estate, just because we had no other choice but to run music all the way through it.
Yeah, no, music's really critical, especially in that rough side of it. And as we mentioned, it's interesting to see how it progresses and when you can get feedback. And I would say now we're a little bit more hostile in releasing it, because if people focus in on those things and they're not missing the story. But overall, all said and done, taking away what we actually did to make it happen, what's your kind of overall, where does Morgan Estate sit for you?
It's my favorite screenplay. It's probably my favorite movie from the Hateful Eight. Just because of the amount of love that we had to give it to get it to where it needed to go. But I love that screenplay, and it performed really well. And I thought the actors did a phenomenal job. And I thought everyone who worked on this project did a phenomenal job. If I was more experienced, I think we would have been able to just get rid of a lot of the technical issues. I think the screenplay could have been honed up a little bit. I would have removed a lot of the dialogue stuff that was heavy character building that really could have been shown instead of told to the viewer. And I think, I'm definitely going to revisit this one this year, and hopefully you guys will see the difference from, the first version to the second version, and what we clean up, script wise and also technical wise. Because this is what we essentially learned from the first time. It's so much easier to do something the second time, because we're going to try and avoid those issues. And, spoiler alert, we're probably going to mess up a lot of things on the second version, and there will be a third version of this movie. And hopefully at that time, we have, bigger deals in place for it, that, a budget will really help it out. But I think as far as a solid movie, it's a good indie movie because it's a good balance between, interesting characters and interesting screenplays. And just enough to push our comfort zone without blowing the budget or doing anything too crazy. I really like the Morgan Estate. I'm really, really thankful for everyone who helped us on this project.
Yeah, it always takes a team. And I always want to say, if we ever seem like, they're saying, all this stuff happened, all these issues, it sounds terrible. That's filmmaking. Making movies is hard. So it's not going to be something that you're not going to have, especially at this level. These are issues that multi-million-dollar productions with thousands of people working to some degree will come about too. So it's always something where this is just the nature of the business, how it happens. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. If you do want to watch The Haunting of the Morgan Estate, it is available on Amazon Prime. You can go ahead and check that out. As always, be sure to check out a lot more of our community stuff. Our Discord is the place to be. We're looking for that first 100 super fans. We're at 57 now. So you're running out of time. But basically, if you become a super fan, you get your name in the credit. You get preferred casting with us. You get a whole bunch of really cool stuff because, again, we want to be one of the most community focused studios out there. So be sure to check out all of our links. In the next podcast, we're going to talk about the last of the Hateful Eight movies, which is The Devil in the Room. For me, this is actually my favorite movie. I'm probably a lot personally attached to it just because I love the idea. I love the concept. It's something I really want to do. So we're going to look forward to doing that. But until then, have a good one.